Well, thanks again for everybody for being here. And thank you to Supreme Steel for hosting us and for contributing so much to Alberta's economy. You've got an incredible venue here. It makes me wonder what you use it for. So one of the owners is going to have to tell me afterwards. Maybe it's just for your corporate presentations, but this is pretty amazing that you're able to offer this hospitality this evening. And of course, thanks to my friends at Alberta Enterprise Group for the kind invite this evening and for the amazing work that you continue to do year after year in representing business interests and connecting your members to government so that we can create good policy. That's what this is really all about. I may be biased because they had me on their roster for a year, but I do think that you are a fantastic organization. You do so much good, and I'm so grateful for you. The AEG believes in the prosperity of all Albertans. It's one of the things that I love about you is that you recognize that by supporting the wealth creators and the job creators, that really supports all of Alberta. And you're also on the right side of the issues, from market access to trade to maintaining a great environment for business and investment. Government is reading from the same page, and it's no accident. So I'm pleased to share what we've been working on before Catherine and I think she's going to be putting me on the hot seat, and we'll be doing some questions from you. But first up, let me talk a bit about our provincial finances, because that's the foundation on which we build. We have had a solid first half of the fiscal year, and so as you've seen, even though we started thinking that our surplus picture was not going to look so great, if oil didn't average $74 a year, it did pretty well the first 6 months. So our forecast surplus is up to $4.6 billion. And that's mostly due to higher resource revenues and personal income tax flows as more working age people move to Alberta and we fill good jobs. But we are also quite encouraged by the fact that the opening of the Trans Mountain Pipeline not only has that increased our production, which has increased our revenue, but it has narrowed and stabilized the differential. If you remember how bad that differential got in the worst days, it was as high as $40 a barrel. Now it's been stabilizing between $10 to $12 a barrel. And for every dollar that narrows, that gives us $600 million in resource revenue. So we were expecting it to be about 16, and it's been a little bit less than that. So that's one of the other reasons why we've been able to have a larger surplus than expected. We're not in the clear, as you've probably seen. Our friends in the United States and the new incoming president has made good on his threat and is intending to bring through 25% across-the-board tariffs as a day one promise in January. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the question and answer, but that is going to be devastating for the entire country and devastating for Alberta, as you know, if that comes through. So we'll be doing a lot to be able to try to address that. Maybe I'll deal with it right now, because what you've seen is that each of the provinces have their own relationships with our American counterparts. And one of the things I would say about Trump is that he sure tells you what it is he wants of you in order to get a deal. He's very transactional. And so when he says, make your 2% NATO defense commitment, don't let China use your country as a backdoor to get cheap goods into the United States tariff-free, take care of your leaky border for both fentanyl and illegal migrants, I think we have to take him seriously on those things. And so we have a meeting with the Prime Minister tomorrow, and those will be the things that we're saying. If we want them to listen to us about the things we care about, we've got to address the things they care about. And I think that Doug Ford and Premier Legault and others are echoing that same sentiment. So you'll see more on that. We're doing, one of the things I would say is that he's given us 2 months notice, which means I think he's giving us 2 months to figure it out. So we are taking it very seriously, but we do have some time to work those relationships. And I'd be happy to come back again and give you an update. But everything that we're doing is a full court press to try to make sure those tariffs don't happen. As you probably know, Alberta alone has cross-border business with the United States of $188 billion. About $120 billion of that is the export of our energy products. And so we haven't heard him talk about an exemption for oil and gas, though we think we can make a pretty good case for one. But the fact of the matter is, unless we can address those other issues, his intention is to bring it in across the board. That being said, we do have some, if we can solve that issue, the future does look bright. We expect GDP to rise by 3% this year. We expect our population will increase by 2.5%. We anticipate that heavy oil prices, investment, and production will continue to remain solid. And while investment in energy leads growth, industry is gaining momentum. None of these changes of course, are responsible fiscal management. Volatile energy prices are always a risk. Natural disasters, as we've seen the last 2 years as well, are always a threat. And we have to meet the needs of a rising population. So the possibility of a deficit is there too. As I mentioned, we do need $74 a barrel of WTI in order to be able to balance our budget. It's been trending below that for most of the last few months. And with the new administration in the US, he, of course, is interested in doing more production to be able to drive those prices down further. So we have to be very cautious about how we manage the coming years. There's no room to be complacent about Alberta's fiscal health. We want to continue to be careful with every dollar, and we also want to continue to save and to pay down debt. We still have our sights set on a personal income tax cut. We think that's important to put money back into the pockets of Albertans, and we are watching our fiscal capacity to determine when the right time is for that. We're hoping to be able to accelerate that tax cut. But while we keep our treasury in the black, we are also addressing persistent economic challenges, such as the shortage of skilled workers that Don was mentioning earlier. We're expanding enrollment in post-secondary programs for healthcare, construction, technology, and energy. We're putting extra money into apprenticeship programs to modernize them and create more seats. We actually have seen a year-over-year increase of 50% in the number of individuals who are going into apprenticeship programs. And you wouldn't believe the amazing things that are happening in our K-12 education system with all of the specialty programs that are being developed right in the junior high and high school level to give kids access to agriculture programs, to aviation programs, to any variety of skilled trades and professions, and it's going to continue. We're also currently spreading the word about apprenticeships and careers in the skilled trades with a promotional campaign, and the efforts are paying off. As I mentioned, the apprenticeship registration is rising, with the latest numbers reaching almost a 10-year high. We're also speeding up the recognition of out-of-province and foreign credentials in our Fairness for Newcomers office. We have a Foreign Credential Advisory Committee that's looking at ways to improve the process even more. Productivity, of course, is another issue. Alberta's productivity is 20% above the Canadian average, but if you can believe it, that still doesn't make us in the running when you compare us to the American states. Growth has slowed significantly here and across the country. Obviously, this is not a problem that is open to a quick fix, but we are taking the lead on coming to grips with it. Last month, I'm not sure how many of you made it down for it, but we sponsored a productivity summit at the University of Calgary, attended by more than 700 experts and community leaders. And I was there, and overwhelmingly, I heard reference to the same roadblocks that being repeated over and over by the panelists. Too much regulation and never-ending approvals that stop industry in its tracks. And that's especially true for oil and gas, which has had the country's highest productivity despite all of the roadblocks being put in its way. I heard that Canada must increase competition and remove barriers between the provinces, and that we need both efficient tax systems and capital spending on things that boost productivity. Of course, far-reaching reforms would require buy-in from our federal government. And right now, I am not terribly confident about that. Ottawa does seem, sadly, more intent on sabotaging our economy and our energy industry in particular than in growing it. And I'm sure that you've all heard the proposed cap on oil and gas emissions is what they say it is, but what it actually is, as we know, is it's a cap on oil and gas production. We have had three different agencies give us their independent analysis of what the emissions cap would do, with the aggressive targets trying to be achieved by 2030 or 2035. S&P Global says we would have to shut in 1 million barrels a day of production by 2030 and 2.1 million by 2035. This would cost literally $6 or $7 billion in resource revenue, $12 billion in total revenue. That is essentially half of our entire healthcare budget wiped out if that was allowed to go ahead. And the Conference Board of Canada goes further, and they talk about the job losses that would happen, not just here, but in the rest of the country, 150,000 job losses. And GDP would take a hit, with Deloitte forecasting a $26 billion cut to Canada's overall GDP in 2035, including a $16 billion decline in GDP produced by oil and gas. It forecasts a 5% decline overall in revenue in Alberta. And we just refuse to go along with this disaster in the making, especially when you layer on what we think is a really great value proposition with our friends in the United States. They want to reduce the cost of energy, and we are their biggest provider of energy outside their own production. We have 4 million barrels a day that is going down to the United States. And so you can't go to the table with the Americans and say, hey, we're your solution to energy security and energy affordability, except we're going to shut in our production. So they have to make a choice here. And so we're going to push them to make that choice, or we'll make it for them. So today, in 2022, we created the Alberta Sovereignty Within a United Canada Act for exactly this purpose. We knew that this was coming. They've been consulting on it for years. We've been at the table trying to convince them to go in a different direction. I've had, from my very first conversation with Trudeau, which was near my very first day of getting elected, through to many in-person meetings with my environment minister, with Stephen Guilbeault. We've had a joint working group of DMs. We've written letters. We have begged them, pleaded with them, cajoled them, and now threatened them to don't do it, and they have persisted in doing it. So about 2 hours ago, I announced that we'll bring a motion forward under the Act, and if passed, it will set us up on the road to a constitutional court challenge when and if the federal regulations become law. Right now, they've produced the regulations with the intention of, we think, bringing them in the early new year. We cannot take them to court to challenge them until they are actually law. I know AUG has assisted us in court challenges in the past with Bill C-69. Thank you, that was successful. Perhaps you'll be inclined to support us on this one as well, if it comes to that. But what we will do is we will authorize us to stop provincial organizations from enforcing the cap. We'll include oil and gas production facilities and related infrastructure under the Protection of Alberta's Critical Infrastructure Defence Act. We will prohibit anyone from entering those facilities except if they have a provincial permit, so federal agents will not be able to go onto those premises. We will make sure that as a condition of license, every company that is developing the resource on our behalf will be required to report their greenhouse gas emissions to us, and then we will report them collectively to the federal government. That will provide the indemnity to all of our producers so that they are not targeted individually, and it will also prevent them from being charged under Bill C-59, which prevents companies from being able to talk about their true record on emissions reduction. We'll be able to do that on your behalf, and we'll also start a bitumen royalty in kind, conventional oil royalty in kind, and gas oil royalty in kind, so that we can contract directly with those partners and consumers that have been coming to Canada pleading for our products. So if we had our gas royalty in kind, we'd be able to negotiate a contract with Germany or Japan. Perhaps we'd be able to talk to our American friends who are 300 million barrels down in their strategic reserve. Perhaps we'd be able to contract with the Department of Defense to make sure that they are going to be able to keep their strategic reserve built up. These are the kinds of things that we believe we can do in asserting our ownership over this resource and making sure the government understands, the federal government understands, that they are not able to regulate that away from us. So those are the things that we've started on down the pathway. We just announced that today. And we'll see what the reaction is when I talk to the Prime Minister tomorrow. Alberta's oil and gas industry, for sure, is the greatest engine of Canadian prosperity. It's a major contributor to North American energy security and global development. And we will shield the industry from Albertans from Ottawa's destructive agenda. And I'm happy to say that Alberta will never be alone in defending oil and gas. We keep on finding new allies. A few weeks ago, our province was asked to join 12 U.S. states in the Governor's Coalition for Energy Security. The organization formed in September to protect consumers from high energy costs. And since Alberta accounts for more than half of U.S. oil imports, we were a natural fit. So we will be working with all of our new partners to ensure steady supplies of affordable, reliable, and cleaner energy are available so that both countries can keep on growing. We think those kinds of partnerships are going to be increasingly important. And I am sure with the incoming Trump administration, there will be opportunities to increase pipeline capacity to the U.S. to make the most of these advantages. And of course, we've got to get over this initial bump that we have in addressing their concerns so that we do not have a tariff. But you can see that they are already talking about the potential of passing the presidential permit to restart Keystone XL or any other type of pipeline egress from Canada. And I can tell you, we have been in touch with all of our pipeline partners and asked them to dust off some of their old plans to give us an idea of how they might do that, whether it's expanding on existing rights of way, doing loops or doing compression, anything that they can tell us about how we might be able to increase egress to the United States. And I think that conversation is going to happen in the very near future. We have got the resources and skills that the global economy needs. Energy production is up. Taxes and red tape are down. Our population is growing at record levels. Some 450,000 people have decided to call Alberta home in the last 3 years, which is an incredible vote of confidence. And investors and companies are beating a pathway to Alberta's doorstep. Yet there are challenges to overcome, some, of course, that we can't predict, and others that are painfully clear, such as the federal government dead set on obstruction. But my promise is that we will never stop doing what is right for Alberta, from fiscal management to fighting federal overreach. Some things are outside of our control, but I do have faith in Canada and its institutions. Respect for the Constitution and rule of law will win out over the kind of activism that we've been seeing. And the result will be a better quality of life for Albertans and all Canadians. And I think that's a goal worth pursuing. We all share an understanding of the best way to achieve it. And I am looking forward to getting your feedback this evening and getting into a great discussion. So thanks for having me out tonight.